Good morning and welcome to Wired's live living room sessions. Last week, Thursday, I had a scintillating discussion with renowned Barbadian artist Annalie Davis. We explored how her work addresses several elements of regenerative agriculture and climate resilience. I highly recommend you catch the recording session on Wired's YouTube channel. Remember, living room sessions are also now being streamed live to YouTube, so you be sure to get on there, click, and subscribe. If you're joining us for the first time, a special welcome to you. From this week, Thursday, and every Tuesday and Thursday thereafter, we will be moving to a new time of 1 p.m. In our sessions, we will continue to explore the topics of regenerative agriculture, climate change, building biodiversity, and renewable energy. My name is Keisha Farnham, and I am from Walker's Institute for Regenerative Research, Education, and Design. And we are pleased to bring you these series in collaboration with our education partners, the Caribbean Permaculture Research Institute, and powered by the Inter-American Development Bank. Today, we're doing something a little different and very special. Our special guest today is our founding director of Wired and the founder of its Walker's Reserve project, Ian McNeel. Ian is an environmentalist, social entrepreneur, and impact investor who leverages 21 years as a successful entrepreneur and international business executive to lead the transition of Walker's Sand Quarry into Walker's Reserve. Ian is being joined today by Ethan Soloviev, Chief Innovation Officer of howgood.com, and Gregory Landua, co-founder and Chief Regeneration Officer of the Regen Network. If you've been following us, you would have enjoyed our conversations with Gregory and Ethan in sessions 3 and 4, respectively, in April. If you've missed their sessions, we encourage you to catch the recordings on Wired's YouTube channel. I promise you they're quite informative. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Ian as he leads the discussion with Ethan and Gregory on how regenerative business is changing the face of corporate social responsibility.
Ethan and Gregory, how you guys doing?
Great. Good to see you all.
Doing good. Good morning.
Yeah.
Thanks for having us, Ian.
Where are we finding you all today? Where are you at?
Gregory, you first.
All right. Well, I'm here in my home office, looking out over beautiful spring day in Western Massachusetts, which is where I call home.
And
Nice.
I'm not far away in the Hudson River Valley of New York, a couple minutes from my 30-acre farm here at the headquarters of How Good.
All right. Well, I'm in Barbados, and sunny Barbados, and things are just kind of slowly opening up over here. And to be honest, I kind of feeling like a bear that was thrown into hibernation 6 months early, and not really sure, not lucid enough at this moment to really fully grasp the world I'm coming into or out of. But it's beautiful here, and it's great to have you guys on the show.
Glad to be here.
I think just to kick this off before we go down the journey or the rabbit hole too far in these sessions with the basic question of what is absent or lacking within our current understanding or framework as it pertains to corporate social responsibility. And Ethan, I think I'll start with you out of your lens. You COO for How Good, which deals with Fortune 500 companies. And what does beyond CSR and the typical framework that you see, what would that look like? What would the narrative of co-designing a resilient community that's adaptive within a regeneration framework?
It's interesting. I was just talking today about how we work with a lot of big companies, some of the largest food companies in the world, especially, and I don't really hear anyone talking about CSR. It's not like it doesn't have the sort of hallowed excitement that it did in the late 90s, 2000s. Like CSR is still important, but it seems like the energy and some of the most leading edge work is not coming from the CSR department. It feels like in some ways, we're certainly not all the way there yet, because many large companies are still having significant degenerative impact overall on the planet. But there's more. It's not like that's a question that's only over here in some corporate, in some sort of outward facing responsibility department. I think the original idea of CSR came from this idea of like, let's do less bad. Like we need to, we're doing all this damage out there in the world. Now we need to like do less bad and say, well, yeah, but we are responsible. We are like making sure there's less slave labor in the supply chain. There's less impact being done to soils. And so I think a lot of really good intentioned and good work happened in that kind of early era of CSR. But now it seems like it's shifting. CSR isn't the focus anymore. Companies are talking more about impact, and they're more thinking about how do we bring that into different parts of the company. It's not just one person or team that's the CSR team. It's like, well, who's the person within procurement and supply chain that thinks about that? Who's the person in the innovation department? Who's the person on the marketing side that's working on that? And so I think that's an important shift that we're starting to see happen. Can go a lot further than it currently is, because it still might just be one or two people in each of those departments, as opposed to every individual everywhere in an organization, no matter what size, having responsibility and regeneration as part of their role. That would be the sort of the far edge that I would aim for, and what I feel like we're figuring out how to do within our company of How Good. But that's the sort of spectrum we're on, from like one person in the company does it, to one person in every department, to eventually maybe everybody thinks about it day to day as part of their role and the work they're doing. That's a trajectory that I think I see starting to happen, but we could go a lot further.
Yeah, that's interesting. And before you chime in, Greg, I've often thought that corporations spend millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars in R&D, research and development, before they even go to a manufacturing stage. So before they even get there, why couldn't these corporations say, hey, before we go into manufacturing, let's build a circular economy and mindset into the goods and the products at the beginning? Will this product have multiple life cycles? Will it extend the life? Can we extend the life of these materials and these products? Where possible, could we build in that there's multiple use cycles? Can we help recover these materials to ensure that the biological materials that are returned to the earth are benign or not toxic? I mean, it baffles me why, at the beginning stage within research and development, if you had that framework in place, that it seemingly it would be at least a fix or a road.
Yeah, I mean, I think, yes, we should definitely have that. And what I'm starting to see that's very interesting, that's really different than even 5 to 10 years ago, is that more and more companies are at least getting that idea and saying, wait a minute, how do we do that? But there's still a significant inertia, right? There's a long history of having not thought that way, that at least it appears not. I think it actually can happen very quickly. I think significant changes can happen inside of people and inside of companies really right away, especially in the midst of disruption. There's great opportunity for that. And so I'm starting to see it. Is that wholesale across the whole economy? No, far from it. And so it's starting to change, but we're still, I feel like, at the uptick of the curve towards thinking in that way from a design perspective from the beginning.
What's your thoughts, Greg?
Well, I'm going to be less politic and more inflammatory than Ethan, as usual. Look, from my perspective, either companies are rapidly innovating to make the world healthier and all of their constituents healthier, including the land base that they're sourcing ingredients from, their customers, the communities at large, all of their stakeholders. Either they're creating net positive impact amongst all of their stakeholders, or they're going to go out of business or be destroyed in the next 10 years. That's it. Any business that doesn't is out. And it's not, think of it this way. We're spaceship Earth here together. We're on spaceship Earth here together. It's like we're on a ship sailing the high seas. And when a crew member is stealing from the other crew members, when a crew member is, poisoning the food supply or the water supply, they're off the ship. That's just how it works. And so, and that's like at a base level, that's still competitive dynamics. I'm talking about the competitive dynamics of a capitalist system are going to force those companies to behave well because we can't afford not to. And so we can be idealistic about it and inviting. And from my perspective, the first movers who are taking leadership, the kind of companies that are working with How Good, they're doing so now out of competitive advantage thinking, not out of just like the desire to do good in an abstract way. And so that's my perspective about the reality of where we're at. And there are people, as Ethan said, who haven't woken up to that reality, who are still operating as if they can continue doing things and not get caught. But that's really just simply not the case.
Yeah. Let me. I know that some people are just joining in at this point, and right now we're having a living room session. I've had the pleasure to know Ethan and Gregory for about 10 years now, and they've both been down to Barbados. They really helped set the framework and the design, the systems, along with Earl here. But they really kicked it off and took the jump, and met them a long time ago in upstate New York, Omega, and some other places. But thanks for joining us. We're sitting here having a conversation of beyond corporate social responsibility, and we've kind of just gone. I was trying not to do it, but it's down the rabbit hole.
you know who you brought on the show, so
I was.
Yeah. I mean, that's for me, just starting with that sort of frank framing of like it is in that, like there's competitive advantage in like just pure evolutionary biology tells us this. There's been a misinterpretation for the last couple of hundred years about what Darwin was observing in evolutionary biology. But if you ask any real evolutionary biologist, the sort of social Darwinism, oversimplified linear, like the apex predator survival of the fittest thing, it's not what Darwin was talking about. He was talking about the survival of the fit. Right. And when he was referring to a fitness, it was the number of different species that depend on you for their survival. So the more interdependence there is, the more woven together we are, the higher the likelihood of an individual species surviving, because species are like a hyper object of an ecosystem. They're they're woven completely into it, right? And so the same is true with companies. Companies are woven completely into the health of our society and into the health of our planet. And so to the degree that companies are degrading either of those things, they're not going to be long-term viable as a company. And so, like, for me, if we just start there, it's a nice reframing of the conversation to get away from the like, oh, well, should companies be doing this, or is it costing them extra money? Another like key piece that I like to say here, just to kind of like rattle things and shift the frame, is, if you're thinking about this like spaceship Earth metaphor, and you're on a spaceship out in outer space, which by the way we are, and your life support starts to collapse, do you have a conversation about how much it's going to cost to send the engineer down to fix the life support system? You don't have that conversation. You just go do it because it has to be done. So like these are existential level actions that will, again, directly relate to the viability of businesses. And I hope that investors, maybe there are some listening in, I hope that they can sort of like listen to that frame and kind of like feel it resonating with like, this is just reality. This isn't sort of like a hand wavy idealism. This is,
what's happening.
It's a realism. Yeah.
It's interesting. I think at one point we were having a conversation, Gregory, and it was a blend of Daniel and some other people, some other thought leaders, so to say, speak, but that a society based on rivalrous self-interest will destroy itself and possibly all the individuals involved.
Right. Well, so that's the theory.
And really it comes back from this we're coming from a place of almost a society that was based on war and continuously warring in some way.
Right. Well, I mean, this is a really fascinating conversation, and sort of like about the rivalrous versus non-rivalrous game dynamics, and like nested competition, because I think it's sort of important to recognize that within an ecosystem, the individuals and animals, like the cheetah and the gazelle is competing with both of them, but those competitions are nested in such a way that none of that competition threatens the very fabric of the health of the ecosystem itself. In fact, it increases the health. And so competition or rivalrous games, when they're nested appropriately, when you're competing over the right things, they can increase the health of the system at large. But when you're competing in like an open-ended way, which we currently do within sort of like war, nuclear war, artificial intelligence, scary things like biological war, all of these things, you end up reducing, what happens is you end up reducing the cost of disastrous, like world-ending action like nuclear war. You reduce the marginal cost of that down and down and down and down and down until, sort of like some organized crime syndicate has access to the same thing that it used to take, an entire nation state, like nuclear arms or something like that. And then it's just like Pandora's box, right? It's out of the box. If everybody's competing, eventually somebody's stressed, somebody's not thinking well, somebody's insane, somebody had childhood trauma, whatever happens, and then it's like, boom, the tinderbox just goes up. And so I think that theory of just taking a step back and saying, which is kind of what Daniel Schmachtenberger and the kind of the Game B community are inviting us to understand. If you take a step back and you ask just simply, what can we maintain rivalrous competitive dynamics within, and what can't we afford to? Like, what do we actually have to have a different approach to? It's a very provocative question, and I think, and I think to sort of circle this back to corporate social responsibility, I think you see that, like, what we're talking about here is it shows up in kind of like really clear ways. I think you see companies starting to make pre-competitive open source cooperative engagements about mutually existential things like climate change, right? Where they're getting together and they're saying, you know what? And the cool thing is the software business, I mean, for all the problems with the software business models, Silicon Valley has had an understanding of like, sort of like having a pre-competitive open source foundation and competing on the last 5% of value instead of the basic foundation for a very long time. So it's not as if this is all just sort of like hand wavy idealism. This is very like rooted in real pragmatic, I think, operationalized business experience. I think that's
Yeah,
a cool prompt, Ian.
I think that's, I mean, and we can talk in further down that rabbit hole into sovereign digital machine states and whatnot. But Ethan, what are you seeing at a very like a now level within the corporations you're working with, or is there any type of hope of having a regenerative relationships?
So yes, definitely. I can't talk too much about any of the specific companies that we work with, but I can definitely point to some of what I'm seeing happen out there in the industry, and especially the industry that works at the intersection of agriculture and, let's say, products. So agriculture and food, agriculture and beauty, agriculture and textiles. And we're starting to see more and more, exactly like Gregory was just saying, this sort of pre-competitive exploration, either pairwise between companies or a bunch of companies getting together to develop like a new set of standards or certifications. I don't necessarily think these are the best ways to approach change in a system. But I think it's interesting, not that what they're creating, and so for an example would be like the Soil Carbon Initiative, or even the Savory Institute Land to Market ecological outcomes verification, which are, they have sort of a leading organization that pulls many other companies together, but then those companies are working quite creatively, quite collaboratively together across multiple different supply systems to say, how could we evolve supply and how it happens in animal agriculture is what the Savory Institute is working on, and then the Soil Carbon Initiative has its eyes set much larger on anything that touches the soil, and they're spending significant amount of time thinking and sort of working together about what is the right path that could upgrade all of our supply, that could upgrade the impacts of all of the agriculture, either putting more carbon in the soil, enhancing soil biodiversity, or in the case of the Savory Land to Market, they're looking at a quite holistic ecological outcomes. And so I think that pre-competitive work is starting to happen more and more. Sometimes it's slower than I think it needs to be, because there's still an idea of it's actually similar. This pre-competitive ferment or foment is really useful, but I think if more people were holding the sort of nested levels of competition that Gregory was talking about, that it's not like these groups need to get together and all agree on exactly the same thing and then go do that thing. I think there's enough creativity that can be generated by a burger company and a pet food company and a high-end fashion company coming together, thinking about what does regenerative animal agriculture look like, and then going out and innovating on their own, still competing in their marketplaces with that knowledge for a sort of uniqueness in the marketplace. I think that can still happen, and that's what I want to see more of. I want to see more groups getting together, either in industry or cross industry, doing the regenerative thinking. You use that term, Ian, that regenerative relationship. So that to me starts to speak to not just how do I make the soil better or make an ecosystem better or make a community better through what I do, but how do we actually think about the whole thing in a regenerative way? How do we approach from a regenerative business perspective? That's what we really need to happen. That will drive much quicker adoption on the ground of whether it's a certification or a new pilot, regenerative farming pilot, like something like what a General Mills is doing. Those sort of things can still give you individual company market positioning and a competitive advantage, while sharing the juicy, pre-competitive, interesting learnings for the good of all the supply systems involved.
Interesting. And out of that whole dynamic, and do you see people trying to move towards more of a cultural and social dynamic within the work relationship, or do you see people just trying to drive tech as a solution? Tech will save us. Don't worry about it. We can do whatever we want. We're fine. Silicon Valley or wherever is going to take care of it. We don't need to worry about it.
There's a bit of both. I don't hear very much. Don't worry, Silicon Valley will take care of it. I do see a lot more ag tech and the sort of investments in ag tech, if you look at the flows of investment capital, there's way more money flowing into ag tech than there is into what we would look at as regenerative agriculture. Partially that just has to do with deal flow. But a lot of what happens in the ag tech world still comes from a efficiency and an optimization perspective, and not even from a like improve and make the system better perspective. It's still from that CSR originally emerged from, of like, how do we do less harm? How do we do precision spraying of chemicals to use 80% less of it? And sometimes we're seeing some interesting things on the edges of like, microbial inoculants or some things that are more biological, but they're in such a tech-heavy mechanical mindset that it sort of limits the ability to actually look at a whole living system and how do you regenerate that. But we're definitely seeing a huge flow into tech on the sort of startup investment side. From my experience, working with some of the larger companies that are out there, and some of the smaller ones that we interact with, everyone's watching that stuff. But at least so far, I'm mostly seeing people be a little more down to earth and practical, and focused on, what can actually help decision making better. What can actually improve the lives of our farmers, and sort of watching the mad investment into ag tech happen, but not like fully jumping on board with it yet, which I think is interesting, healthy.
Yeah, I agree with Ethan's analysis there that, and I would sort of bring it back to my initial point. I agree with Ethan's analysis that most of the ag tech out there is coming from sort of optimization, efficiency, sort of do less harm, use less resources, optimize your irrigation efficiency, optimize your pesticide efficiency, sort of economy of scale. And hey, that model's failing and will continue to fail, and you can get more efficiencies with a broken model, and all those businesses are going to fail. Yeah. And all the investors who invest money in them will fail. All of that is going to fail. Just a giant fail. The only, like, the competitive advantage here is to be.
Tell me what you really think, Gregory.
The competitive advantage here is going to be to be sourcing technological innovation from a holistic perspective.
Yeah.
Metrics, re-examining, how and where we profit from a perspective that looks at the flows, the energetic flows in a system from a different vantage point than pure efficiency. And that's just really within the next 10 years, there's a forcing function that has to happen. There's soil degradation, there's climate change, just like we've hit the limits of the whole of planet Earth. We know that now. The science tells us that this isn't clear. So there's a big social lag. Like, not everybody is aware, right? And so they're still in quotes innovating from way behind the curve. This is business 101. Like, those businesses will just go out of business because they'll be spending money and resources.
It's a great freeze frame for him.
So, to me, yeah, sorry about that. So to me, again, this sort of circles back to the beyond corporate social responsibility in today's moment is, I believe, creating a mutually regenerative foundation for business, getting the right metrics, the right measurements, the right business models, the right technology to do so sets up companies and investors to be future-proof, essentially, and non-displaceable. And that's the invitation, right? And the invitation is to assess your strategy according to that sort of like these levels that Ethan is inviting us to see. Are you operating with just are you creating abstract baselines and trying to do less bad against those baselines that are meaningless? Like, we're going to do 80% less pesticides. That's meaningless. It's crazy.
It's good bridging, though, right?
Well, it just
Could be.
I don't know. I actually would say, I would say almost any measurement system that we're talking about to engage a company in a contextually relevant innovation cycle for their supply, for instance, needs to instead be setting arbitrary baselines or adopting arbitrary baselines and getting incrementally better against them. They need to have a contextually specific understanding of, for instance, the biodiversity and photosynthetic potential of the ecosystem, of the agro-ecosystem that they're sourcing from. And then they need to set their performance metrics against that. How well does our, cassava plantation that produces the ingredients for tapioca perform against the Amazon rainforest?
But ultimately, I still say, as great as that is, and as much as I agree with you on many levels within a business perspective, that's a hard enough leap what we're talking about right now. But I think we're still and this is going into another. I think we're still treating symptoms, even that what you're talking about is a symptom, because ultimately we need to evolve our sense of self-interest and transcend this idea zero-sum game that we're playing. The rest is just kind of bullshit.
But even within, I guess the case I'm making is I heartily agree with that, and that's a social change. But even if you keep a rational, materialistic...
That's a conscious shift and evolution that we have yet to hit. And we're still, and the question becomes, when do we become, human 3.0, and that we've learned from all of this, and that we take that next evolutionary leap? Because, we can talk about how businesses should be doing business different, but we're still doing business for self-interest at the end of the exercise.
Well, that's what I'm trying. Actually, that's sort of like the point I'm trying to push here, is that at the end of the day, even if you take a very rational, empirical, self-interested perspective, but you do it with what the leading edge of empiricism is telling us, what's really the realist empirical perspective, the self-interest of an individual and a business and the planet are inexorably linked and must be considered together, even from that old ration. So I think you can even go another level, and you can sort of understand things in a more from a different paradigm. But even within the paradigm that most people are operating, if you push hard enough towards the real empiricism, you just come out with that transition from ego to eco. It's demanded basically by science.
Let me give a quick pause, and just for everybody who's joining us, because we've been going down the rabbit hole, as we've been saying here. And so if you're just tuning in, you're tuning into Wired Living Room Sessions, and I'm with my friends Ethan and Gregory, and we're talking. We thought we'd just have a real living room session here. So we're just batting a lot of things around. And if you're joining us, the subject is beyond corporate social responsibility. And I think we're achieving that at this point. So go ahead.
Cool. Well, so just to reframe and I'm back again. Sorry about that. So just to reframe where we just were, in a way, we're sort of having the conversation of, do corporate leaders need to go through some sort of altruistic paradigm shift in order to make decisions that realign their businesses with ecological and social regeneration? Or can they operate with their current paradigm with just the right information at their fingertips? Or is there something in between? I think that's kind of where we're swimming right now. I'd love to hear Ethan's take on that.
Well, I think it's really interesting you point that, because in a way, both of our companies currently are actually, we kind of walk both lines, because both of our companies are in the information business. right? We're both working with data, with large amounts of data, with data that shows in I think what we would each say is more real than some of what's out there, impact on the ground of the decisions that a company makes about what they're putting in their food or what they're putting into their products. Like, what is the impact that actually has on the ground? We have one approach to gathering, coalescing, structuring, and sharing that data back. Your company has another. And so in some way, we're both sort of saying, like, no, you can be rationally self-interested for your company. And as long as you get a hold of this data and can incorporate it into your decision-making processes, you can actually make pretty significant shifts. At the same time, there's a way in which we both also believe in the sort of deeper internal consciousness shift. And I don't personally identify with the idea of altruism as much, but there is a disruptive consciousness shift that can happen to help people see nested whole systems and the interrelation impact between them. And I think when that does happen, it becomes a multiplier on having access to good information. So to me, it's not an either or. It's like, yes, both are great. I'd be happy if someone just started using the data and making sense of it and actually making decisions based on it. And I think that's part of the key, not just getting it, but making decisions based on data that shows real ecological, social, cultural, animal welfare impact. And then there's another layer to add to it that can sometimes happen from seeing the data, right? That can sometimes happen from actually being, wow, that's the impact that this product
that's the shift. That's the moment that they needed to have to shift their whole entire perception.
That can be. It's a shock.
Upgrade their mentality over this.
That alone won't do it.
Right.
It's a good shock, but it needs more. It needs a context. It needs a community. It needs some strong will, not to just be like, whoa, that's crazy. And let me go back to normal. What's the new normal, everyone? Right? Are we back there yet? Have we gotten to the new normal? You see, everybody wants to say, well, when do we get back to normal?
Yeah, it wasn't working.
It wasn't working, and it's not going to happen. There is no, but that pull, I'm using an example from what's happening with COVID right now, but that pull is there, COVID or not, to just see a shock, go, whoa, that's what's happening in the Amazon, that's what's happening in the oceans, and then go, oh, okay, I got to get back to normal, comfort, soothe, let's keep doing business here. So those shocks are useful, but they need a larger context, a larger process of regeneration, of regenerative business thinking in order, I think, to kind of crystallize at a higher order of functioning that will help, as Gregory's been saying, help you survive, the next 10 to 20 years.
Well, it's interesting because whether it be the U.S. or Barbados or Hong Kong, Italy, pick a country, Latin America, governments, using this time and coming and bailing out. I'm just, once again, we're bailing out finance and markets. We are not bailing out the economy, right? So, and if agriculture and all these, and things of sustainability and regenerative mindset, what a great opportunity for money to be flowing that direction that we're living in right now.
Yeah,
the opportunity is to completely shift from one paradigm to another, or at least really start the bridging of that, really now, right now.
But, well, you see it, I think you see it in Europe. Europe is pretty aggressively embracing a Green New Deal in terms of their post-crisis policy approach. That may or may not happen in North America. It's just a delay. If it doesn't happen, it's just sort of delaying the inevitable. Whatever the policy details are, it's like I agree with you, Ian. We have this amazing opportunity that
we may not have, and hopefully we don't experience again. I would probably argue that this is just the trailer. But
we're bound to experience this was not a black swan, as I said in my other.
What did you call it? A black elephant.
Black elephant. That's
explain that.
So a black elephant is when there's an elephant in the room that everyone refuses to acknowledge, until which point. Oops! It looks like I got cut off right as that. So a black elephant is the elephant in the room that everyone refuses.
That happened
to acknowledge.
last time, by the way, too. I wonder if every time you mention that,
they did. The elephant that everyone refuses to acknowledge, and then it starts rampaging and knocks everything over, and everybody's like, "Oh my gosh, it was a black swan." No, it wasn't a black swan. Like, we've known that a global pandemic, due to urbanization, due to habitat destruction, due to all of these drivers that lead to, a dangerous situation in terms of epidemiology, was coming. And we were, as a society, like willfully ignorant about that. We chose not to take the precautions. So the nice thing about this, I mean, blessings and condolences to everyone who's been
Yeah.
I'm sorry, guys. So COVID could have been worse. And my hope is that this shock to our system, at the very least, the lowest order outcome here is that we're smarter as a society about how to deal with this. Like Taiwan, for instance, has dealt with COVID really quite well. And the reason for that is because they had to deal with MERS and SARS 10 years ago.
That's right. That's why a lot of Asia has been able to do that.
Yeah. So maybe maybe we, as like the Western Hemisphere, I think as a whole, has been dealing with it very poorly. The United States, Canada, the Caribbean, Latin America, everybody's been struggling. So hopefully we as a whole, the Western Hemisphere, will also be able to learn from this at the lowest order of things. And the highest order is that we can actually, as you guys have been noting, look back and kind of say, wow, look at all the things that weren't working about our economy and how fragile it is. I think I was reading 72% of our GDP in the United States is just sort of like meaningless retail consumption.
Yeah. I mean, in Barbados, you have tourism. That's the main driver. And how do you retool an economy, and how do you do it quickly so that people can, so people's bellies can be fed, and you can. It's amazing. I mean, you really almost have to take a look at what we've all been buying into, and is that, I'm not saying whether it's right or wrong. It's up for individuals to take a look at themselves and what they're engaged in. But certainly we're in a time period now that, I don't even know what the jobless numbers in the United States, and here it's quite high. It's just, having these conversations even that we're having, or that really are I believe, important conversations to have. But how does a person even have the ability to I don't need to go here, but a lot of people just don't have the ability or the resources to sometimes be having these conversations. But what is true is that businesses and private sector that do run businesses can start back up their businesses if they so choose, with a different mindset, instead of using all the funding that they're receiving, or the donations, or the time and love and volunteerism that they're getting, to really rethink about what it is they want to create, not trying to go back to recreating the same thing again.
Right.
And that's at any level, of entrepreneurialism, right? A guy who's just starting out with a couple of $100, or somebody who's retooling, their industry and the corporation.
So I think one thing that's been running through my head as we've been talking, coming back to this term of corporate social responsibility, and what is beyond. I think a big thing that I'm seeing is that what we want to go beyond is the old corporate social responsibility that like emerged in the 80s, 90s, and was a thing for a little bit, that was like a do less harm, surface gilding. But I think there's something very interesting about the phrase corporate, which actually means body, like our body, and then corporate social. So social in a way is the social sphere, the community that corporate, that body is nested within, right? The corporate is within the social, and then the responsibility, originally it was kind of only on the social side, but now we can see, as Gregory was saying before, from ego to eco, we see that responsibility, you can think of it as an ability to respond not just to the corporation, not just to the social, but to the larger ecosystem that social and corporate body sits within. And I think so that the nested nature of corporate social responsibility is actually pretty cool. Yeah. And if we could sort of like reclaim that, and to your point, Ian, not just for big corporations, but literally for anyone who has a body, any business is a being, is a body. So if everyone could sort of hold that and be more aware of that nested nature of things and the impacts, how could you not be, as this thing just came from the outside and crushed so many businesses? So can we hold those nested realities and start making decisions, all businesses? I think that would be like the beyond old corporate responsibility, is everyone taking on this nested sense of a corporate within a social and this larger ability to respond to the world and the ecosystem. That'd be great.
Yeah.
All right, great conversation, guys. Definitely quite scintillating. We do have a couple of questions from the audience, and I want to give them an opportunity to have to hear from you guys directly. So let's take our first question from the audience. It's from Scott Clark, and it says, businesses have been forced to pause right now and could use this opportunity to restructure and reframe. What is the first step? Where do small businesses in the Caribbean start? And so I'll start with Gregory, because you're shaking your head first, and then we could move our way around, and each of you could give us your take on this.
Yeah, well, that's a great question, Scott. I would start with, the healthy life of whoever your users or customers are, and be thinking about, who your customers are and what in regenerating they need to participate in regenerating their communities and their families and themselves. And whether it's, whatever your business arena is, there's sort of like thinking of your customers and growing their capability so that they're empowered in these times, and then retooling your offerings, your service, your products sourced from that, I think is a really powerful approach to using the disruption in the moment as an opportunity to co-evolve with your customers and build good business.
Right.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. That's exactly what I was going to say. I'll just put it in a little more context, which is that sort of customer's life and capacity centric view stands in opposition to the like optimize and efficiency approach and view that we've talked about, and also stands in opposition to some generic idea of doing good, or like a mission-driven business, or I'm gonna serve this social purpose, but it's abstract and it's not connected to the individuals who are actually your customers, who have real lives, who have been affected by this like you have, and who you could grow a stronger business by figuring out how to serve, how to grow and evolve their capacity. If you look at Google, Google Trends, you can like look and see what search terms are trending on Google over the last however long you want to. Take a look at how to grow as a term and just see what happens. There's so much opportunity to help so many people in the world grow their capacity, and figuring out what is it that my business can do to help grow the capacity of the people I serve, I think is key.
Yeah. Well, I actually know Scott, and he runs a great dive shop and company here in Barbados, and I know that he and his wife and others really are active in permaculture on the island and doing a lot of regenerative work, which is great. And my answer, just kind of knowing Scott, would be, he was one of the first people to, Scott, you're one of the first people to really look at lionfish situation and looked at it as a source of food instead of it just this thing that came up and is eating all of our reefs, and did such a good job with exposing the restaurants and hotels to lionfish and that taste. I mean, And I think that those type of that mentality of how can we connect with nature and stack functions within our businesses is so important, and it remains to be even more important. So out of that analogy of what you're doing and what others are doing, I think, and these, as Gregory and Ethan eloquently put it, I think it's stacking functions and making sure you're looking around you, and the problem is the solution, right?
Yeah, definitely. Do we have any more questions from the audience? All right, our next question is also from our YouTube channel, which is great. We're streaming live from YouTube now, so we're encouraging as many people to subscribe. So this is from Edgewaters. The DuPont lawsuit spanning 19 years fiasco is an example of sheer neglect of CSR. Has legislation changed since this? And what are the common practices businesses are inheriting to improve their CSR? Who wants to go first? Don't go all at once.
I mean, I have to say I'm not as familiar with the compliance side of things. I mostly work sort of like, I guess, on the voluntary adoption side of things. As I said, like, I see it as a sort of competitive imperative for businesses, and most business leaders that resonate with our business offerings are also driven by that sort of desire. The DuPont situation, you know, I'm guessing this is like the Indian, the sort of infamous pollution and, you know, deaths caused in the Indian subcontinent by their sort of like the explosion of that plant. I do think that legislation changed out of that. I also think we can't count on legislation, unfortunately. I think one of the most effective social interventions against that kind of, whether it's DuPont or Exxon, there's all these sort of pretty bad actors that have done bad things. Some of the most effective action has been folks like the Yes them look like, and, you know, making these companies look like fools and shaming them is actually remarkably powerful. I think, you know, you see stock sell-offs, you see people start to engage in sort of shareholders starting to engage in advocacy and things like this when there's that sort of like really bad publicity. So that's sort of, I know it's only a semi-answer, but that's sort of where I take that question.
Good.
Yeah, I'm kind of in a similar spot. I'll just respond briefly. Legislation is often a lagging attempt to arrest disorder and stop the worst, and is rarely pushing things forward in a leaderful direction. And so I'm seeing much more innovation and growth and opportunity on, again, as Gregory said, this sort of voluntary adoption and seeing the competitive possibilities and advantages of moving things forward. And I am so grateful for all of those who are working on the slower legislative process to sort of hold and backstop things, although it's always disheartening to see political regime change and things that were worked very hard on just get stripped away. Competitive advantage for companies seems to stick and sort of go longer. So I don't know. That's just, I'm talking about why I focus there. But I don't think we should look to legislation as basically the way to hold up or improve and go beyond CSR. Over to you,
Ian.
Yeah, I mean, I think that ultimately, I mean, again, I'm at the place that I just think we keep treating symptoms, and you know, you look at this as we need to start looking at things holistically, and certainly finance is a part of that, and making sure you can pay your light bills. But I think through this whole conversation, you know, we can't keep up exponential growth, you know, with exponential debt and with exponential, you know, taking resources out of the earth. It's just completely unsustainable. So whether I don't think the answer is necessarily government policy, but I sometimes wonder if we're capable of regulating ourselves as a species.
Well, activism informs policy. There have been many cases in history where, if the people want it and the people are doing it, then it's going to eventually inform policy. So,
and you're seeing
it can happen either way,
happen.
policy then or people then policy. But anyway, you can get action.
And what's really great, to y'all's point, is that you're seeing more, call it activism or call it people waking up. More and more, and hopefully that is enough to drive the change.
Yeah, definitely. All right, we have time for one last question. And this one is from Jen Clark. Hey, Jen. Is Walker's Reserve an example of the type of CSR that you've been talking about? And I know all three of you have experience with Walker's Reserve. So let's go.
I'm mostly going to leave this to Gregory and Ian. I haven't been there for a bit, and you all know what's happening on the ground much better than me. So I was glad to help spark the movement there, but you all have been rocking it.
I'd really like to hear Gregory's take of what he's saying.
Well, I mean, I guess it's all in the language that we choose to use. I certainly would not refer to Walker's Reserve as an example of CSR generally, although I think that within the framing of what Ethan was talking about around how we can reconnect with just like the words of corporate social responsibility, and we can understand them from a different vantage point and see the nested nature. The journey of Walker's from sort of an extractive industry towards a regenerative ecosystem of enterprises, from the agroforestry to agrotourism to crafts and arts, and sort of like the full expression of all that's possible, the multi-use reintegration vision. To me, the language that speaks to that comes from a sort of a different world, right? But I do think that we could speak about that in terms of a transformational corporate social responsibility approach, where there's a complete reimagining of the very nature of the business model that's operating there. And in fact, a transformation transformation of ownership and governance, and just like the very nature of the operations that are taking place on Walker's are transforming to be something that's thoughtfully designed to engage the community, to engage the landscape, and to create a much different set of economic flows, right? And so I love, I'm super proud of having been able to work on Walker's, and really grateful to Ian for his vision and leadership there. And I think it's really an inspiring story and kind of, it's a story that we're all going to need to go on in some way over the next 10 or 20 years, which is a pretty radical transformation of the type of economic relationship and to me, it is beyond corporate social responsibility. That's a nice way of putting it.
All right, great. Ian.
I know we're almost out of time. I mean, for me, this is always about a story of separation, and it was separation from the earth and finance and nature, all kind of separation of really myself from nature. And so in a lot of ways, there is no roadmap, or at least especially 10 years ago, there might be a more clear idea of what a framework is. But I think, going from a degradative economy to a regenerative economy, we do our best at Walker's, and Wired, definitely has come in and added an extra layer. Whether I'm an example of CSR or regenerative or whatever, I can't always be concerned with that, because I'm just putting one foot in front of the other, and we all hope that it's the best foot forward. We're in the unknown. There's not many examples of what we're doing out there, so I hope to be of service, and I hold space for whomever wants to come in, and we freely invite that type of framework and energy to be built.
All right, so take the next best step. Yeah. All right. Any last words, guys, before we close off? Anything you want to leave our audience with today?
I'm super grateful for the opportunity. It's been a lot of fun. Thanks for putting up with my provocations and soapboxing about all of this. And
That's why we love you.
really lots of fun. Hope the audience had as much fun as I did.
Yeah, this is great, and I'm actually excited about that. The new way we're thinking about it, talking about corporate social responsibility here is kind of fun and interesting, and looking forward to talk to anybody who's in CSR who has thoughts about what we've said here and about the kind of evolution of the CSR industry and approach. I think it'll be really fascinating to hear. So thanks again for the opportunity.
I'm just really grateful to you guys came on, and it was fun. It's fun hours. So that's what counts. And also, grateful.
Right, guys.
Thanks.
Thanks, Isha. Thanks, team. Thanks, Ian.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Ethan, Gregory. It's certainly a very interesting conversation. Ian, it was great having you on. And thank you to Ethan and Gregory for reappearing. If you've missed any part of today's session, you can catch us later on Wired's YouTube channel. And remember, it's as easy as click and subscribe. If you are just joining us, we just had Ethan, Gregory, and Ian having a really interesting conversation about regenerative business and changing the face of corporate social responsibility. Join me again on Thursday the 21st at our new time of 1 p.m. when I speak with Israel Mapp, creative producer, architect, product designer, and potter, about how he uses his creative practice to create spaces that are not only beautiful, but address issues of climate resilience and increased biodiversity in urban spaces. So look forward to seeing you on Thursday. Do tune in at our new time of 1 p.m. And remember, go to our YouTube page, click subscribe. Thank you.